Here we go. Hello, Nick Gorini. How you doing?
Hi, Guy. All good. How are you?
Very, very good. Where are you dialing in from?
So, I am on the terrace of the Conduit in London, where we have all of our operation. We have we do convene here, we meet people here, we have our offices here, and then today I'm just outside in the air. Yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. I know the space well, and it's a lovely space to call your home, I guess. And great that you're dialing in from the terrace. You're outside, fresh air, sun shining. Right, to kick things off, I'd love it if you could just give us a really quick introduction into who you are and kind of what led to Spin VC.
Absolutely. Very happy to be here with you. Very excited of doing this together. Nick Gorini, founder, managing partner, GP at Spin Venture. Spin Ventures is sort of like an ecosystem where we look at the consumer and retail sectors, and we see every year there's $500 billion inefficiencies. And that goes from the way we extract resources, transform resources, distribute products, sell products, and get rid of products. That creates a $500 billion inefficiencies every year. And of course, it's responsible for about 27% of the greenhouse gas emissions, a few billions of metric tons of water, and other sort of like environmental impact and also social impact. Whereas what we know and what we see is that there are different ways to do things. And there's a way to actually operate, and we envision a completely reimagined way of operating, which sort of like drives efficiency and adopt regenerative and circular practices throughout the supply and value chain that can certainly decrease these inefficiencies and decrease the impact, the environmental and social impact that these inefficiencies will create. So that's kind of like, so we made it our mission day in, day out to really shift from a very sort of like inefficient, linear, extractive, outdated consumer retail sectors to a completely reimagined data, technology enabled, circular and regenerative consumer and retail sectors. So that's our mission. And the way we execute that mission is in two ways. Of course, they work together, but one way is we invest, and the other way is we integrate, aggregate, and grow. So in terms of investment, we invest in business to business solution at very early stage that can enable this regenerative and circular process from the supply chain to the value chain and back. So we're looking at regenerative materials, we're looking at biomaterials, we're looking at recycling technologies, fiber to fiber technologies, separation technologies. We're looking at the use of data throughout the supply and value chain. We're looking at how data can completely transform commerce. We're looking at all the new re-commerce platforms to allow longevity, to allow repair, reuse, resell, returns of products. And we're looking, of course, at all the hardware software solutions to return products and close the loop. So those are the investment. Current portfolio has 20 companies. Since 2012, we've done a little bit more, but some companies sort of like a big some learnings, I would say. Investing is not sufficient to make things happen. This is a very nascent way of operating, and it is a one of integration and aggregation. One could operate with the most spectacular bioregenerative materials, but then if they don't have the data, well, it really carries little value. One could start looking at using AI to optimize manufacturing. Great. If you don't have reverse logistics systems in place, then again, your value gets diluted. In order to maximize the efficiency and the unfair advantage of the regenerative models, it is a game of integration and aggregation. It is about bringing these technologies together, connect them. By the way, this is no different from what is happening with tech wars in general.
Yeah.
In tech, it's about API. Well, here we're talking about integrations of processes and procedures and departments which are not often connected. So in order to make that happen, we've created an open innovation platform where we invite innovators. This is beyond our portfolio. So it's open to all innovators that fits into this sort of like thesis. We'd also invite corporates who are willing to move into these regenerative models. And we also invite investors into a fully subsidized platform. So it's not a commercial platform, it's a fully subsidized platform for us to make sure that things happen. So this is sort of like a little bit on Spin Ventures.
Very cool. So you're beyond more than just a traditional investor. You're sort of acting as a bit of a sort of support network for the circularity kind of industry. And just to go back one or two steps, how have you ended up spinning around, dare I say it, the circular space? What led you into becoming an expert in circularity?
I guess I have to go back 1980. I think we can have a couple of days talking about this. So I have to go back to 1980. So I was walking, on this beautiful island with my mom and my grandfather, and then I saw kids making little cars with Pepsi cans that were otherwise thrown away. And so I, apparently grabbed my mom's arms hysterically to beg her to get one of these cars. That car has been on my desk for over 40 years now. And when I was a child, I had no idea why. What was so special about that car? Then, when I was 10 years old, my friends were buying these beautiful skateboards that you would assemble from the States. But my parents were adamant that I should not be skateboarding because they thought it was dangerous. And so, when my friends were throwing away their boards, I was completely gutted because for me, it was the most precious products that exist. So I used to collect those boards and then secretly, bringing them into a garage, remove the first layer of ply, put the color that was in the garage, put some stickers, put some varnish, go back to school, sell them, and then eventually, I managed to make some money to get the other components to build, a skateboard for my girlfriend and I. And again, it was maybe I don't know a couple of £100 equivalent at the time, but for me, it felt like it was a fortune. And then I guess my career started in the creative sectors. I was lucky enough to meet like extraordinary creative people, the likely of like Steve Jobs, like Lee Clow, founders of Chaya Day. I've worked with John Hegarty. So I've met some really creative people. But I guess in 2006, as I was coming to London, just as a for fun, together with some friends, we set up this company called Creative Recycling Industry. In fact, I have a props here. Not sure this on video, but and again, we were looking at how corporations used to invest tremendous amount of money into doing these like beautiful advertising billboards, and then they used to throw them away. And whereas we said, actually we could use those billboards to create accessories, and so we set up this company called Creative Recycling Industry, and we would approach corporations, identify areas of waste and inefficiencies in their supply or value chain, and then sort of like upcycle those materials into products we were doing, and then help those corporations to use those products throughout the value chain. So again, what I have in front of me is a table mat with a Vodafone billboard. So Vodafone did 50,000 square meters of PVC posters turned into a series of accessories. We then start doing little toys for the denim industry. So this was a side gig, So by 2010, we had about over 20 lines of upcycling, and again, so that was 2007, 2000 to 2010. That model was super exciting. However, my main job was in the creative and media sectors. I also had created another content business, and then there was this sort of like creative recycling business that I loved, but then, true to say, I was too busy, too inexperienced. It was also a bit too early, and I made sort of like one of those you learn not to do, which is sort of like getting in bed with with perhaps not the right person, and so that business went against the wall. But that really, kind of like had me realize that there was something magic about that, and there was something magic about um, what we were doing, and it kind of like realized what was so special about the car. And so it all sort of like became clear, like I think there's 8 billion of us, and for like across 8 billion people, everyone would see waste, but there's one person where everyone sees waste, they'll see a car. And so that's the gift of imaginations, which I believe is at the basis of every entrepreneur. You see something, you make it happen. I'm sure you
Yeah.
guys had a vision for, you had a visions for Blue Earth, and then, from there, you have this constant drive to build and make it happen. So I think, imaginations and vision drive the world forward. So that's something we absolutely energize us. But the second bit is, if you and I need to build a car from scratch, well, we need to go and get the aluminium. Whereas the person who's building the car from that aluminium, again, it's going to have surely, the lower costs, and so his car is going to be either slightly more competitive or slightly more profitable. And as a way of adopting this regenerative model, it also does lesser impact onto nature resources. And so I guess this is where spin come from. So of course the executions have changed, the market have changed, the technology have changed, but I guess those simple ideas have remained. So this is about completely reimagining the way we operate. This is about driving efficiencies. This is about maximizing existing resources. So the core principles, I think, are the same. They have been the same for 40 years, but the execution has very much changed. And we've learned. I've been lucky to be surrounded by phenomenal people I can call business partners, and of course all the ventures that we've met, invested in, and are in the house today. It's thanks to them that all of this is possible. We're just sort of like, trying to move, the needle forward.
Yeah. And that amazing. I mean, that's a long time ago, 2006. Imagine, that in that period between 2006, 2010, you were probably knocking on doors and people were like, why on earth would you want to reuse that and upcycle this? It's just, those words, which are common language now, were probably not even heard of. I imagine there was a lot of explanation. So it must have been a different world back then.
I would say, yes. I think 2006 was definitely too early. 2010 was definitely too early. I could tell you, guy, 2023 was too early. It's just like, it really depends. It really depends whose door you've knocked. I have to say, there's some phenomenal entrepreneurs and brands who are innovator by nature. Your Gani, your Stella McCartney, your On Shoes. It's just a culture to innovate.
Yeah.
Other so they have the culture. Other industries, other companies, they have the profit to innovate. So if we look at like Chanel, LVMH, and Kering, they've all invested and created platform to kind of like drive this regenerative model forward. Public information. The other day Chanel just announced their new platform, and they're pledging to invest between 50 and 18 million to enable regenerative models by way of bringing together ventures. So I think this is now it's happening. In 2010, yes, I agree. It was kind of like people go, okay, so
Yeah.
what do we do with this? But even then, I guess the way we were able to do some projects and drive some ventures was really coming from an efficiency point of view. Like, hey, dear company XYZ, you invest £100 into advertising billboards, which you then throw away. Your cost per acquisition of these segments is about you know, £80 per person. We believe we could bring that down. That was the conversation. So it was about efficiency. It was about making the most of what was out there. It was about cost per acquisition. And so eventually, when you come in with a rational, sort of like tangible argument and at the risk in executions, that's when we were able to find, again,
Yeah.
some projects, some success.
Yeah, well, that makes total sense. I mean, it sounds as though you've been leading with the commercial angle. I mean, it's very easy to kind of look at the circularity space and think, well, that's a good idea because everyone's just trying to reuse and save the planet. But I think we've learned in the last 20, 30, 40 years that message doesn't necessarily stick, and the age-old phrase of "money makes the world go round" is never going to change in my mind. So, am I right in thinking that kind of you had this vision that there's a much better system where we consistently reuse products and materials wherever possible, building a more circular, less extractive system, but always have an eye on why would anyone do this? It's got to be better and it's got to be commercially viable, and that seems to be something that has kind of stuck with you from the early days. That's led to where you are now.
Yeah, I 110% support that. This is about improvement. This is about betterment. This is about, you could call it progress. You could call it in many different ways, but absolutely, it is about driving resource efficiency. It is about driving market efficiency. It is about driving operational efficiency. For us, it is about efficiencies that now can be measured, monitored, and fed back throughout the supply and value chain. And so those efficiency generations become, either, reduce costs, incremental revenues, increase profitability, optimize manufacturing, producing less, producing better, returning resources, returning goods. And the output is, you know, what we call, sort of like the unfair advantage of regenerative models is double materiality. So it's where you start aligning and, kind of like your revenue growth, you decouple that from your impact to nature, and you realize that actually that you could, it is demonstrated that you can increase your profitability and decrease your impact to nature. So that is now being proved with data. So it's no longer an idea revision or an experiment of most innovative brands. It is now being proven with data. And yeah, I very much believe in aligning stakeholder. This is the one conversations that, in my experience, does align investors, brands, innovators, public, private sectors. It just aligns everyone. That's kind of like the conversations and the lens that we keep on this.
Yeah, and you touched on the announcement of Chanel and LVMH's fund. I think you said it was 80 million pounds into this sort of circularity regenerative space. There's a lot of skepticism when large brands that haven't necessarily been squeaky clean all the way through are throwing money at that. I personally have an opinion that it's a good thing. No one's perfect out there, and if they've got themselves into a position where they do have excess capital that they can reinvest into the system to fix problems, and that's a good thing. But where do you stand on that, and kind of what's your relationships with the large corporates that are investing in that way?
I do understand the challenges that comes with growing. I I do think I could vaguely understand the challenge that it takes to grow like a 550 or $500 billion business. So I have no idea what that entails.
Yeah.
One thing I have the slightly idea is, you know, corporations are, risk averse entity. So to transform, we live in a thriving world like fast paced startups, investments, and so it changes every day. Corporations and managers' responsibility is to kind of like mitigate that risk of innovation. And so we're not talking about, changing the printer here. We're not talking about, adapting a new software. We're not, and that has taken 30 years. What we're talking about here, this is a completely reimagined, this is just completely reimagined supply and value chain model. I mean, this affects the way you extract resources, your entire supply chain. This affects the way you account for products, the way finance look at planning. Think about the admin departments that's used to sell, account for, purchase of goods and then selling of products. Now all of a sudden we need to account for, repairing, return, assetizations of products. Then we need to kind of like, add in these services. I mean, it's a complete shock for an organization. And so with the utmost respect, it's not a transformation that happens overnight. I mean, of course, if you are, let's go, for example, in the furniture industry. Okay, so there's a beautiful story of this company called Norm. I mean, this is literally like two individuals from IKEA that had this vision to create like furniture as a service platform where furniture is considered assets, And you cannot do that within an established organization the size of IKEA. What you can do is kind of like spin off, spin out, or leave the companies and create a new platform. And so they did. And now you have Norm, which is a spectacular case studies of company that using product as asset. And so the minute that you start shifting your mindset from, hey, I'm selling tables to, hey, tables are our asset, then your entire organizational structure change. The way you look at resources change, the way you manufacture your product change, the way you account for products change, your business model change, your incentive to your team, internal team change. So what we're talking about here, guy, I think it's a radical transformations, and radical transformations do take time in large corporations. So um, personally, I can only applaud the innovators of the world, the Gannis, the Stellas, the On Shoes, and I think it's worth. I tend to focus on the positives. I think it's worth looking at what H&M, LVMH, Kering, Chanel, Ralph Lauren, and these companies are doing, and focus on that as opposed to what they've
Yeah.
not done or what they could be doing. Because what they're doing is a little step forward. And so we made it our job to kind of like bring those companies together with the innovators. We need to simplify that effort.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think, yeah, often we get challenged about who we bring into the room, and our attitude is, if we can help the larger corporates transition faster, that is going to have more impact than 1,000 startups that are giving it a crack from the bottom up. But often, and like you've referred to there, the best route is you support them in their transition, and a big part of their sort of transition towards these new systems is by working with the startups. So the role that we can play, both Spin and Blue Earth, is making sure that the large corporates are finding the innovators that are fixing problems from the ground up, connect them, because actually then they both can go faster. And I think that's it's an area that's often overlooked, and it's certainly not talked about. And actually, startups aren't always that good at talking to the corporates, and vice versa. It's so hard, especially when you're dealing with these companies that don't have like hundreds of people, thousands of people. They've got like 20,000 plus. They're like their own little cities. So how on earth do you find the right person? So we're trying to build this catalogue of people in the network, so that then we can consistently open doors. And you're a big part of that, and that's why we love having you in our world. And anything circular that comes on my desk is, you're pretty much the first call I make, is to go, does this look any good? To just move on slightly, it really does feel like the circularity space is finally picking up some momentum, and it's an area of like extreme growth. What do you think are the biggest drivers of that? Where does regulation come in, and where are you seeing kind of additional technologies around the kind of role of AI and everything around that? Are those the sort of two driving factors that are making this happen?
I do agree that I think the regulatory push that we are witnessing in continental Europe is definitely kind of like the last little push. I think climate emergency is at risk of human extinction. Consumer demand is off the roof. New brands that have come to market with more, sustainable proposition, if you want to call them that way, kind of like they've gone from 0 to billion in like few years. Data are there, facts are there, results are there. I guess the regulatory environment has been the last push to really enable data. And I think enabling data throughout the supply value chain are going to be the biggest driver. Of course, we're talking about, we I think we don't realize the amount of data. I mean, I was having a conversation with a corporate the other day, Saturday for breakfast. They have been working on enabling their products with to the systems to integrate digital product passports and start creating that relationship with consumers from a t-shirt. I mean, we're talking about 400 million garments. So so for a company to go from we're selling t-shirts and hoodies and jeans to actually, hey, we have 400 million data points. That is a phenomenal change. One that, of course, will require, a whole new level of like data collections, infrastructure, analytics. And so that is definitely a big area of growth. And then connecting those data throughout the supply value chain, it's another big area of growth. And that's where we've been seeing, a lot of like innovations. But I think yes, so the factors that are driving growth for like these innovative regenerative models, we're seeing sort of like market demands, specifically in the clothing and apparel, footwear, accessory sectors in continental Europe. I need to specify all the way. So if we go up through, almost to regenerative agriculture, there are some hybrid model. I like to cite, Fibe. I think what they've been doing is really going all the way up to the supply chain and taking, it's a very strong examples of like waste to value model where they, would take the leftover of the potato crop, turn that into fiber that are, again, price and performance improving from the competitive fiber, and they have a double material aspects because they help in decarbonize both, the waste stream, the agri waste from some agricultural sectors, and also, of course, decarbonize the clothing and apparel sectors. So we're looking at this phenomenal model, and of course, I love to talk about, our portfolio's company because they're doing a phenomenal job, whether it's like Sparkster with color, Sequinova with Sequin and the cellulose platform, Nanolume with graphene. And by the way, they just announced yesterday a partnership with, Gymshark. So, we start seeing some most amazing regenerative models in the biotech space with materials, waste to value models, and the way we really create products. But then if we go down, midstream, there's phenomenal innovations happening there with, how do we make the most of this data? How do we use this data? How do we transform this data into a way to better produce? And then, of course, other areas of innovations are downstream into the retail, where there's, again, new ways of creating products, combining collections, reuse, recycling, and 3D printing. I think a local examples would be the guys at Batchworks with their latest spin-off called Kubi. I mean, this is phenomenal. I mean, just think about it. Phenomenal, bespoke, made to order, personalized headphones for kids. Fully designed, fully circular design, locally made, locally recycled, locally repairable. I mean, £36. So it's not just it's not just a cool brand. This is just like it creates value for everyone. And then of course, we look at the value chain. We look at retail rental model like buy rotations. We're looking at reverse vending, reverse logistics systems like buy waste, and way to bring back products. Repairing as a platform, both the SIM model, also Sojo, a great model. So there's different models that are growing, centralized, diversified. I think there's a variety of like thriving models that create both efficiencies and value. And that is where we're seeing biggest interest from corporations and biggest interest from investors. And that's where we are looking.
Brilliant. Okay, and then just to kind of dig into the other side, that's where the interest and the momentum is. But you obviously see a lot of circular startups coming through. Are there any sort of consistent themes on the challenges or the bottlenecks that they get stuck on? And I guess which are, there's some of those companies that you mentioned there, Buy Rotation, Batchworks. These are companies that I've known of, and they're doing brilliantly well. What is it that is separating those sort of ones as successful? What is the driving factor that kind of pushes these businesses through? Because there is a lot out there that I hear of and they fizzle away, but there's also, there's the 1 in 10 that really, grabs the market and people totally get it and they push forward. So I guess, to summarize, key challenges, who's pushing through and why?
So most of the ventures that we are looking at, they do either have a key B2B proposition or they have a hybrid business to consumer and business to consumer proposition. Again, whether we, let's look at repair. Of course, if we whether we took, I don't remember. There's a Dutch model, which is kind of like enabling social work. There's the social model, which is kind of like centralized repairs. There's the distributed model from the SIM. Regardless of the model, without getting into the advantage of each one, because these are different models, but they do both create a new proposition for consumers, but they do growth with brands. And that's why, I mean, they all have like phenomenal, I have to say. I mean, We did invest in the sea, but I think what the work that Josephine is doing at Sojo is spectacular. What they're doing in Amsterdam is spectacular, and there are other ventures that are growing. So, but these are circular enabler. Okay, so they are enabling a little bit of the puzzle. Okay, and so in our experience, circular enablers, they have a specific propositions. They go into the value chain of certain corporations and enable a little bit. And of course, we know about the sexy ones. We don't know about if we had to have like a chat about the reverse logistic companies that actually enable return of products. I'm talking about, buy waste or tire, they're less talked about, less sexy, but equally important. But these are sort of like pieces of the ecosystem that we integrate, aggregate, and then they can work with a consumer and a B2B model. And that's where we're seeing growth. Of course, it is more challenging if you come to market with a full DTC proposition and you come to market with, I don't know, nappy as a service, baby gear as a service, clothing as a service. And we've seen a variety of like great proposition.
Yeah.
I mean, we could pick any. I mean, I've seen anything from like shampoo as a service through to, there's a whole like as a service category, which is
Yeah.
designed as a circular first model where they maximize quality of inventory, product longevity, rental, flexible models, return models. I mean, these are, again, we talked about earlier about norm. So norm is one of the few possibly talked about circular first direct to business and consumer model, heavily invested. For other, I think the capex, the investments in the asset in the capex required, the capex investment required, the asset investment required is challenging, but also their growth is the biggest risk because if you launch an as a service platform product and then you are accounting for 100 users and then all of a sudden you have 1,000 users uptake, then you multiply your assets by 10, and with that goes your risk. And that's where we've seen a lot of the ventures being killed by their very own success. There was in the Nordics there was a company, baby gear as a service. If you think about it, they were doing the job of a variety of ventures because they start designing baby gear designed to last forever, which is itself a business of design, manufacturing materials. They then start creating the retail model through partnership, which is itself another business. Then they start creating the business model to optimize the circular model. So
Yeah.
these are, I applaud these entrepreneurs because they're, in order to create their business, they're effectively creating businesses that now in 2025, these are three different businesses. And so
Yeah.
what we are seeing in this sort of like new wave is some corporate, some manufacturer shifting to longevity as a strategy. Therefore, they're designing their products for circular models, but it's a manufacturing job, right? So it's kind of like a design and manufacturing job, which certain corporations can adopt. For a startup to do it, it's happening. It adds complexity. Then there's a
Yeah.
retail element, which again, we're seeing Decathlon is doing a phenomenal job in, I think it's Decathlon and Twice Commerce. They are now renting tent. But is Decathlon producing tent? Perhaps yes, perhaps not. But surely they're using tents that work well with rental service. So Decathlon, as a retailer of the size of Decathlon, is enabling those models. And then
Yeah.
we are also seeing software platforms, super cycle bin ones, and then there are others that are enabling purely from a transactional point of view circular models. So what 5 years ago was a company, it's now maybe 4, 5, if not 6 or 7 different businesses.
Yeah.
And I think we've seen the same in tech. Like you go back 30 years ago, you had this company trying to do a website with content and CRMs and payment systems, logistics systems. Now, one side there's probably like what 200-300 companies with API integrations working together.
Yeah. 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 But then actually comes to the point that we were on earlier of that the importance of that relationships with the large corporates. That's a really good area to focus on that B2B to C. But if you're not getting that B2B thing right, then is almost going to be impossible to get the scale that you need, because the big problem is the amount of products that's coming out of those large corporates. So if we can kind of help them on that journey that is more circular and enable them to make more money and put things back through a circular system, that's where the problem's getting solved at scale. And if you can sit a business in the right place in that system, well, that's where you can grow a really successful, highly commercial, strong business. That makes total sense. I'm seeing it actually a lot in the startups that are in our world. I think a few are in yours. Club Zero, they've gone way further into B2B to C. Reebok, and they're in the kind of the packaging space. Reebok's in the reuse of tech. Now I know them really well. Both of them are members of Blue Earth Ventures, and they're now making really good headway at scale via their B2B to C models.
Yeah, Guy, I'm very much openly a great fan of the work that you guys have been doing for the past few years, and the work you keep on doing by bringing together ventures, investors, and corporates. I think it's really unique, and and again, you can see how great companies like the one you mentioned and others, because you guys have that kind of ability, also spot phenomenal talent. It does work in that context. But also what you've been doing recently, I think it's magical, bringing together investors, brands like eBay's and others into this kind of like workshop get together. Let's remove the barrier. Let's integrate. I think this is so much needed, so much refreshing. And it's something that we really see the value of, and really I would like to contribute, collaborate and promote, because there's what we're seeing is again, at cost of making like a kid example, it's like a dog biting his own tail, right? So there's phenomenal innovators out there, and so the solutions do exist, full stop. Throughout supply and value chain, solutions do exist. Corporates, brand managers, they are just individuals, so sometimes they don't know, so they cannot know about the latest waste to value graphene innovations. They have a gazillion other things to focus. So sometimes they don't know. And when they do know, the question becomes, great, how can I integrate that? And so they do want to do things. It's just, and investors, but sometimes it's just either a matter of knowledge or a matter of like, okay, how do I integrate these with that into our processes? Who does decide? Whose budget is this? And then investors, capital is there. And we're not talking about charitable NGO foundations or patient capital. We're talking about high risk venture capital investment is there. And they're all sort of like, biting a tail. So I think what you guys are doing, I think it's phenomenally important to break that barrier, because you bring together in a room on a specific theme like you're doing, at the forum in literally a couple of weeks, bringing together, circular models with big platforms, with investors and brands. I mean, there's so much that could happen in a 3-hour sessions in the morning that to shift things forward. Yes, I'm a great fan of what you guys are doing, and I think it's so much needed to really shift the conversations. And as soon as we start seeing more actions, it's just gonna unlock like tremendous energy, innovations, and capital.
Yeah, well, thank you for pointing that out. That's definitely a big part of what we're trying to do. We have a mission statement that we want to transform the way the world works, but we're not going to do that on our own. It's going to be working with the startups that are driving the innovation, with the corporates that are wanting to transition, and then we use our events to convene people and put the right people in the right rooms. So stuff happens, and it's definitely not a talk shop where everyone's kind of blowing their own trumpets. It's all about action and trying to drive things forward. And predominantly that action is driven by transaction. It's the investment going into the solutions. It's the partnerships that are driven by commerciality that are really driving the change, which is good. And we're getting towards the end of time. I've got a couple of extra sort of questions just to start wrapping things up. I know it's always tricky, but I'd love to know kind of the last few investments that you have made, just to kind of paint a little bit of a picture for anyone that is looking in. I know there's, I'm sure there's a few that are going through that you can't talk about, but maybe the last few that you can talk about and why you're excited by them.
I would definitely love to pick maybe like some for like a few for for I would pick possibly like I think for regen material nanolume, for downstream innovation by rotation, and for sort of like midstream innovations batchworks. The reasons are, I think, nanolume is one of those where you look at biotech innovation started from the medical sectors, shifting to the clothing and apparel sectors. I mean, it's waste to value model, coming to market with a product that performs X times better than their competitor, elastine, with a price that is competitive, retrofitting existing infrastructure, working with existing supply and working with existing value chain, and with a carbon negative model. I mean, what's not to love? So
Yeah.
it's almost like, hey guys, where were you when this was happening? And I really applaud the team of co-founders, their journey, the success they're receiving, and their growth. And so I think the market will just follow. We'll just see in the next year like a variety of like new innovations. And there are many in the biotech, biomaterial space that are growing up. I mean, I love to talk about others like, Sequinova, Sparkcell, that also doing phenomenal job in that sectors. And if you look at like, really sort of like disruptive innovations, I think the work that Batchworks has been doing for the last 8 years is really changing the way we look at resources, the way we look at design, the way we look at manufacturing, the way we look at retail model combined into one operation, happening in Hackney. So they really demonstrate with actions. I mean, they really had to create companies to demonstrate it works. I mean, Kibu was like a proof to show the world, hey guys, this is how our model works. But they've been doing phenomenal work with brands, like Paul Smith and others. So again, I think it's great examples. And again, I know they're just going to grow. It's a phenomenal team, and they have both the design sensitivity for circularity, but they also have the technologies, they have the manufacturing, they have the engineering, and they're just genuine, sort of like advancing in their growth. And then I think downstream, it's really hard to choose because I think both the seam and by rotations are doing a phenomenal job. The seam is really turning like the oldest job of the world of like, seamstress and repairers into an into an enable community that allows consumer to really access, repair, and care in a way that is unseen. So I think Layla and her team have been doing a phenomenal job. And you look at the numbers, it's even more phenomenal. And then in a completely different way, I think Sheeta and her team at By Rotations, they've literally turned, 500,000 people wardrobe into a retail. I mean, that's just phenomenal. And I think it's like what Airbnb did to, our second home in the middle of nowhere. It's like I have a home in the corner of, I don't know, Wales or Cornwall and never use it. And then all of a sudden it becomes like a destination for a weekend, and all of a sudden expenses are paid. And so that allows a kind of like, incremental revenue. So I think one thing they all have in common is one, phenomenal founding team, B, really driving that kind of like value for all the stakeholders, consumers, business, value chain, and they all have that kind of like double material model where they both drive efficiency, but they also drive incremental value, e.g. revenues for all the parties involved. These are sort of like, I think, we are raising another fund just because there's so many opportunities coming. We don't want to miss out. But, our bet is that we are seeing a whole new breed of companies that align efficiencies throughout the supply and value chains with impact. And that is the key to regenerative models.
Amazing. Well, three brilliant companies there. I know Batchwork and By Rotation pretty well. I don't know Nanolume, so I'll pile into that one and make sure I do get to know it. But brilliant to hear the sort of passion coming from you on why you've got behind them, how they're going, and the fact that they're growing and cutting through, which is so important. The more success stories we get, the more that people can't ignore this is the future, which is brilliant. I'm going to finish on one last question and put you on the spot a little bit, which is again, I often talk to founders and we talk about which other businesses are inspiring them. In this case, you're an investor, and I know that you've got a very open mind on working with lots of other people's, but who in the investment space is inspiring you in the way that they're doing business and supporting companies at the moment?
Thank you. That's a great question. Stop me because there's a full list. I think so.
No more than two. Otherwise, we'll keep going. There's a theme here.
Okay, so first of all, I definitely want to sort of like shed some lights of the phenomenal works that individuals like, Carmen Raffaelli, Julie Blaine, Elena Wasserman, Christine Amour-Levar are doing in bringing together hundreds of investors focusing on climate tech. And so
Yeah.
that's one big sort of like, well done, thank you, amazing job. I'm also a very great supporter of these individuals, and I mean what they're doing is really transforming the way we operate as investors. And then I guess on the investment side, it's really hard to choose because there are like some great sort of like similar circular focus ventures. I struggle to find just one because I think, you know, but regeneration VC, I would say, if I had to pick one, I think regeneration VC is definitely open the wave of like regenerative models, circular models. And again, personally, I'm a great fan of the works of Michael and the teams, and they're growing phenomenally. So really happy to
Yeah.
see them growing. Always wish them the best.
Yeah. They're brilliant. I was actually looking through their portfolio yesterday with Linley, just going, "Wow, what an amazing portfolio!" And we were speaking to Michael the other day, and we're very close with Jamie on their team. So yeah, they're an amazing bunch, and definitely part of the Blue Earth community. And we should get them on and do an episode with them like this. But I think we're going to wrap it up there, Nick. Thank you as always for coming in with so much advice and wisdom in the circularity space. You've been here longer than most. You've got a lot of knowledge that you are able to share. You're very active, making it happen, investing in companies, supporting companies, and you're always there and willing to support certainly us, and I know plenty of others. So thank you for everything you're doing in the space, and see you in a few weeks at the forum.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. It's always exciting to to share in this. I think the energy is contagious. Again, congratulations on everything you're doing. Happy to be working together, and looking forward for the forum.
Good stuff. Cheers, Nick.